Wharton Tech Club is probably one of the most popular and big clubs, and that speaks to the strength Wharton has with tech actually. So it's a massive club with a lot of resources. I have paid off my loans. I think when I graduated, the loan I had was around like 160, 170K. I did the monthly installments for a while and then just like paid it off. It's typically, what I would say is that if you getting one of these jobs in tech industry or investment banking or consulting, you can pay it off within 3-4 years if you want to.
Welcome to the Crack the MBA show. My name is Nupur Gupta and I'm your host. Our guest today is Suyog Karnawat, who graduated with an MBA degree from Wharton in 2019. Suyog holds a BTech degree in Electronics and Telecommunications from College of Engineering, Pune. Post-college, Suyog worked with Credit Suisse as a software engineer and as product manager in Pune and London. During this time, Suyog also pursued and received a CFA charter. At Wharton, Suyog was a writer with Wharton Follies and involved with the tech and data clubs. Suyog pursued a tech investment banking internship with William Blair in the Bay Area. Post-MBA, Suyog joined AWS as a senior product manager and then transitioned to Twitch, eventually joining Google, where he is leading a team of PMs owning the merchant vertical at YouTube Shopping. Welcome, Suyog. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Suyog, to begin, can you tell our audience a fun fact about yourself?
You get asked this question so many times when you go for an MBA. But yeah, I have a weird flex. Ayushmann Khurrana, the Indian actor, he once asked me for a selfie. That's my fun fact. It sounds cooler than it actually is, but the story behind it is I used to perform in street plays in India, which are like you take social topics and you perform on the streets. Ayushmann Khurrana actually got his start doing that at places like IIT Bombay. So I was performing one time with my team and he was in the audience, one of the judges, I think, I don't remember. But yeah, after we were done, he kind of like came up to us and like asked us for a selfie, which was really cool. And we obviously obliged. He was really either very impressed or just like very kind.
That is quite an amazing story. I love it. All right. So before we move to the admission side of things, just wanted to get to know a little bit about you personally in terms of character building, right? Can you share some of your winning habits that have led you to where you are currently? Because you've really gone a distance in the things you've done as well. Super impressive.
One thing I'll call out is I've always strived for like self-improvement quite a lot, which I think has played a big role in where I am. And I've kind of approached it with a lot of relentless positivity and curiosity, which I think is a key because a lot of people strive for self-improvement, but they approach it with dissatisfaction. Hey, I'm not good enough. But looking back, I've never felt that. I've always been very happy with where I was and who I was. Having said that, I still wanted to like improve and be a better self just because it's like a fun way to live life. And that's what I've done for most of my life. It's a small example, but relevant for this conversation is in my second year at B school, I decided to join tech industry as a product manager. I was going for all the interviews. And one important component of product interviews is product sense interviews. I'm sure you're aware of this. And essentially questions like build a phone for the blind, those type of questions. And I sucked at it. I was really bad at it. I did not clear a single interview for any companies that had this. And this was typically like the first round. I ended up joining Amazon, which I'm very fortunate about. The only reason for that is Amazon does not take product sense interviews. It only does behavioral, and that I was good at. Fast forward a couple of years, when I was recruiting and looking for a new job, the same thing again. I read a lot, I prepped for product sense, but it just did not click. I must have applied to like 5 to 10 companies, and again, failed like every single product sense interview. I ended up joining Twitch, which was an internal transfer. And then the last move that I made, I spent so much time and so many reps doing product sense interviews that somehow it just clicked. And now I can like give a product sense interview in my sleep. And I ended up getting offers from like all the companies I applied to, all like who's who of like DoorDash, Coinbase, Meta, Lyft, Google, which I ended up joining. So that's just a story of my life. It's been a lot of fun.
Very cool. I absolutely love the story. And I really liked your example. And as I'm thinking about our audience, who's mostly folks who are looking to apply maybe now or say in the next couple of years, would you also have another example going back in time, maybe say from college or as you were a working professional where you implemented this approach?
Yeah, another example that comes to mind is I come from a very small family and I don't have a lot of folks who kind of have gone on to do engineering and MBAs. So I didn't have a whole lot of like frame of reference on what I should do for my undergrad. I ended up taking the major of electronics and telecommunications just because I had read in some newspaper that it was way to become an astronaut. It was a bit crazy then. And within like 6 months or a year, I figured out that it's not for me and I hated electronics and ended up like completely checking out from academics. And my GPA from undergrad is very bad. I remember talking to you about this. It's like lower quartile of the GPAs. I just didn't care about electronics at all. But yeah, that doesn't really stop me. And I was interested in computer science. I took a few computer science courses and I knew I wanted to be a software engineer at least to begin with. And I got like the best software engineering gig I could get out of undergrad. And the same when I was applying for MBA, I knew my academics wasn't going to hold up for admissions. And I was trying to figure out like what other things I could do to make up for it. And again, with that strive, I pursued CFA Charter, which is considered like a hard exam. So it kind of like makes up for academics. I also spent a lot of time preparing for GMAT and getting a good score that was competitive enough. So yeah, that's another example I could potentially share.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thanks for sharing that, Suyog. And moving to admissions, as an alum of Crack the MBA, can you share your experience of working with CTM? And also, if you could
Yeah.
talk about what led you to pick CTM over other admissions consultants.
Yeah. So talking about what led me to CTM, it came recommended from a friend who had just gone into Wharton. So obviously a good recommendation. I remember speaking with you and three things kind of stood out to me. The first one was that you yourself had gone to Wharton, so that gives you like instant credibility. The second, you also had a very bespoke and selective approach, which felt very comforting. You're not working with like a million people, you're working with a small set of people, so you could like actually dive deep and spend more time. And the third thing was, which is very interesting, I think like a lot of admission consultants, when you speak to them, they will kind of burst your bubble a bit and they kind of like deflate your aim. So like if you tell them, oh, I want to aim for XYZ school, they would kind of like bring it down and oh, you won't get there. But you did not do that. You were very supportive of the schools I want to apply. So it just made a very easy decision for me to go with you. And looking back, it was definitely the right decision. I can sincerely say that it's unlikely I would have gotten into Wharton without your help. So thank you for that. Overall, the experience was amazing. I think the reason it worked so well, I think there are two main reasons. Okay. The first one is you bring a lot of context to the whole process. When I was like applying for MBA, I was really busy at work. A lot of folks who apply for MBAs are very like over ambitious and do a lot of work. So a lot of us don't have time to spend and on learning all about like B schools and what the processes and what the specialties of different B schools are. So you brought that context, which I was missing. That was great. And the second thing I feel that was really important was storytelling for the essays. Like all of us have really rich experiences and accomplishments that we can portray, but you need someone with a lot of experience to kind of like push you to dive deeper to find those like golden nuggets. And you also need someone with good experience to take all of those golden nuggets and craft it into a good story, which I think you did really well. So my essays looked very different working with you. I would say it was a very positive experience.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Suyog. All right, speaking specifically about your Wharton essays, right? Could you share maybe a couple of stories that allowed you to shine in the application process?
One that comes to mind, which I think was, according to me, really important for the essay. This was an extra essay that you could write, an optional essay, I think. And you pushed me to be like vulnerable and talk about some of the financial hardships my family had gone through. I wasn't originally planning to. A lot of these things feel awkward for a lot of us to talk about, but honestly, they make great stories and they show a lot of resilience and strength. So I spoke about financial hardships my family went through, what I did during my undergrad and my first job to kind of like help my family and bring some like financial stability, and how that was kind of like a through line to what I had done and what I was trying to do. So that really brought all of the essays together and it kind of like rounds out your personality. It's not at all about like accomplishments and GMAT scores, but there's like a different side to you. That I would say was probably the most important essay.
Very helpful. I clearly remember that essay as well. So yeah, it was wonderful, amazing. And so, what do you think Wharton's admissions team is looking for in its evaluation process?
One like sort of cynical approach or like way to think about this is a lot of B schools, including Wharton, they want to bring in folks who help them with their reputation and their standing and their B school ranking. So I think I would recommend a lot of folks applying to keep that in mind. Like, how can you help Wharton stand out, or how can you help Stanford stand out? There are three things that I've noticed really matter. The first is they want to make sure that academically you're super strong and you can handle all of the curriculum that's thrown at you. And it's quite a lot. And the second, that your academic scores, etc., help them with their rankings. So GMAT scores are pretty important in MBA rankings. So a better GMAT score definitely helps. The second one I think they look for is they want a proof of accomplishments, the fact that you've done better than most others in your position. And what's interesting is that because these admission committees are trying to judge folks from like 180 countries, they don't always have a frame of reference on what's a good accomplishment and what's not. So peer comparisons really help. So saying that, hey, you won and Olympiad competition among like 100,000 other participants. I think like those comparisons help a lot. Or you got promoted 2 years ahead of your class of undergrad. I think those things I've noticed are really powerful. And then the third thing I would say that's sort of important is they want to make sure that wherever you want to get to after MBA, they want to make sure that they are actually able to do that. So showing kind of a connecting the dots and showing a through line of, hey, this is what I've done and this is what I want to do. And there's a achievable path to get there with everything I would get from Wharton or any other B school. If you say that you want to go get into private equity and you have no finance private equity background, most schools will say no to you because they don't think they can actually get you there. You're just like setting them up for failure. So that's the third thing I would say. Show a very clear through line on what you've done, how you plan to get to where you want to be. And those are the most important things, I think. Again, I'm speculating here. I have no
I love
inside
it.
vision.
I love the points you mentioned. Yeah, I agree with what you're talking about as well. And so you were awarded a substantial merit-based scholarship as part of the admissions process as well, right? So how
Yeah.
can applicants increase their odds of securing scholarships? Do you have any advice there?
Let's see. I think the way colleges use the scholarships is really to attract folks. They're trying to make a pitch for those folks, right? So if they really want someone to join their B school and they feel like they're going to get other offers from other competing B schools, they use scholarships as a way to kind of like get you to come to them. So I would say there isn't anything like special formula to it from what I've seen. It's more of if you build a strong application and if it's stronger than most of the folks applying to that school, they will give you some sort of scholarship to attract you. That's what I've noticed in my case, at least. There are some scholarships that are very focused on some specific diversity, inclusion sort of goals. And those differ. Mine wasn't that. Mine was a simple, like, hey, here's a pot of money, come to us, sort of a thing. So for diversity and other scholarships, it's very much they're looking for a specific thing. And if you meet that criteria, plus you are like a strong candidate, then it makes sense to get you that. That's what I have seen. But my experience is limited to one scholarship that I got. So
Right,
yeah.
right. Was it a specific kind of scholarship that you were awarded, and how much was it for?
I forget the name. I think it was like India Fellowship or something like that.
I had the same one.
Oh, yeah, the same one. Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I think that's the one I had. And then it was around 50 to 60K for 2 years, something like that.
Right,
Yeah.
right. That's great. That's substantial as well. So you're moving to the Wharton questions now, right? What, in your view, is Wharton's unique identity? How is Wharton different from other business schools? And there's another MBA graduate in your family, so you obviously have close knowledge of another school.
I do, yes. My wife went to Duke, Fuqua School of Business, and I went to Wharton. I think what really struck out to me about Wharton is it's sort of like choose your own path kind of B school. The reason I say that is it has a really large student body. I think 800 or 900 folks in one class and 1,800 across the two classes. And what that means is that you can find the type of social circle you want. You can find the type of people who kind of like meld with you and you can spend time with them. That also means the number of student-led activities that are available to you is so vast and you can choose to do so many different things. And the same happens with a lot of courses and academics. The breadth of courses that are offered by Wharton is really, really large. And even more so when you combine a lot of other Penn schools like Penn Engineering, the courses which you can take when you are doing your MBA. You can choose what you want to do. There's like first couple of quarters you obviously spend on fixed curriculum, but after that you're free to choose like a whole host of courses. And again, when it comes to career, it's the same thing. Wharton is obviously strong in a lot of industries. It's known for finance, and it is very strong in finance, but it's also actually very strong in tech. There's a lot of Wharton alums in tech. It's very strong in consulting, private equity, a whole host of industries. So I'm sure there are B schools that are better in like certain aspects of these, but Wharton is sort of really good in all of these aspects. That's what my experience was. And every one of those 800, 900 folks had like a different Wharton experience because you're able to kind of like choose your own path and go and do what you want to. That's what made Wharton really special for me.
That's amazing. And yeah, and historically, Wharton's been known as a finance school. So it's nice that you talked about the strength
Yeah.
in other industries as well.
Yeah, 100%. It's been
Yeah,
also trying to build a lot of strength in entrepreneurship. There's an
very
entrepreneurship
true.
center.
Right. With the Tangen
Yeah, so
Hall
it's
as well.
exactly. So it's been trying to expand and it's doing so very successfully. There's also there's another Wharton Center in San Francisco where you can take one semester, I think, or 2 semesters. So that gets you closer to the tech industry and everything that's going on there.
Yeah, that's a fantastic opportunity for sure. All right. And I want to talk about something fun as well when it comes to the Wharton experience before we get into the drudgery of academics. So, what does living in Philly look like? Where did you stay and why?
So Philly is a good balanced city in the US. It's not like New York City where there's a bunch happening and once your classes are done, everyone's going to disappear and do their own thing. But it's also not like Durham. My wife went, it's a very, very small town, so there's not a whole lot to do. Philly is kind of a good balance. There's a substantial amount of things to do, but also no one's going to disappear. They all live together in like a small block. So in terms of living, I lived in this place called 2400 Chestnut. It's right across the river and great location. You can walk to
Popular
school.
Wharton location as
Very
well.
popular Wharton building, like a lot of Wharton folks there. It's 15 minutes walk to school, great management. On the affordable side, so a lot of folks go for that.
How
And it's
much
also
does it cost?
oh, good question.
Okay.
It was one on the affordable side.
Okay, fair, fair.
Yeah, so 2400 Chestnut, that's what we did. One thing I would say is that most Wharton folks, when they spend time in Philly, they tend to spend time within the Wharton bubble to venture out. So unfortunately, real Philly, a lot of us have not seen. We are all living in this like Wharton bubble when we are there because there's just so much to do as part of the student body. But yeah, Philly is a perfect place to like bring that together and make that happen.
Yeah. What does living in the Wharton bubble entail? What are the kind of things you're doing outside of the classroom?
Lot of partying. So typically the way typical Wharton week would go is you're done with all of your classes and there's typically some social activity planned, usually around the social club that you're part of. So you might be part of, say, the wine tasting group or the poker club, or there's so many of them. So typically there'll be like some activities for those, like a couple of times a week or once a week. Then there are small group dinners. A lot of people invite each other for dinner. As you can imagine, right? Like 900 people are like descending on this city and they're all living in this small block. So there's a lot of like social activities happening almost on a daily basis. And then towards the end of the week, there'll be large like planned so events or celebrations that are really key to the Wharton experience. Like there is a white party, I think that's what it's called. So every week there's like something going on. Plus the academics is really like demanding. So you're doing all of that. Plus you're like spending time on academics if you want to. So that keeps you occupied. You don't find time for anything else.
Right. And there's recruiting as well.
Plus, there's recruiting. Yes, I forgot about that. When recruiting is in full swing, that takes up like most of your life.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure. And what were your favorite eating spots in Philly? Can you speak about the food situation as well?
Yeah, and this might be relevant for a lot of folks. I'm a vegetarian. I don't eat meat or eggs. Thankfully, that's not a problem in most of the US. There are a lot of Indian eating spots in most of the major cities, Philly included. So a lot of spots where you can grab Indian food, mostly North Indian, but there's also like a couple of South Indian spots that are really good. There is on the Rittenhouse Square and near the school. Philly is also known for a lot of food trucks. So there are a ton of like food trucks where you can just like rush out and grab lunch during your break in your classes. So there are a lot of like Indian food trucks. This one called Lovash, I think, which is like right next to Wharton.
Convenient.
Very convenient, yeah. So in most cases, you will find like a lot of food options around Wharton and also around Rittenhouse Square, where a lot of people lived. So they're like two hubs. Yeah, so I've never faced any problem. And then I recommend most people to like learn how to cook because you can't be eating out all the time. My cooking skills really increased when I came to the US, and that's highly, highly recommended.
Okay, good to know. And any restaurants that you specifically want to call out that you enjoyed in Philly?
Oh man, I was there 6 years ago. There is a South Indian place that is really good. I think it's called Amma's. It had opened sort of my second year in 2019.
Okay.
It was amazing. It was really good. I hope it's still open. So yeah,
Yeah,
check it
I
out.
think it is because I've seen it in Instagram, in some folks' stories and whatnot.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, that was a really good South Indian place. So if you're craving South Indian, that's the place to go.
Okay, cool, awesome. And now moving to academics. So, can you share the academic highlights for you during your MBA at Wharton and speak about the star professors and the most popular electives as well?
Yeah, 100%. So I'll start with the basics, right? When you join Wharton, you have to do certain set of courses. This is like a basis of all like business management, right? So you have marketing, you have macroeconomics, and I actually loved all of those because it's a very wide kind of breadth of subjects that you take. There's managerial decision making, and it goes into a lot of depth. I was an engineer, for example, so my education was very siloed. You come and you're like exposed to all of this. It's a very interesting experience. I loved it. This is an unpopular opinion, but I loved micro and macroeconomics. Everyone hates it. It was my favorite subject there. So that was really fun. Once you're done with that, then you start taking electives. And there's so many options available. There's a point system that Wharton uses. So a lot of popular courses, unfortunately, spots fill up and you have to like allocate points correctly. The three courses I'll call out that I really enjoyed, and I think everyone should take, irrespective of what they want to do. The first is by Katie Milkman. She is well-known personality in like behavioral science. She's written a bunch of books about it. How to Change is a book that's really good. She takes a class around similar like decision making, behavioral science. That's been very influential for me. It kind of introduces you to all of these like cognitive biases that we have and how to kind of watch out for them when you're making decisions, and also how to like form habits and trick your brain into doing certain things. I still use a lot of the principles learned in that class. So definitely highly recommend it. Katie Milkman also has a podcast. You can catch up on that. It's really fun. The second one I'll call out, which is kind of a deep cut, but there's a class from Penn Medicine on mindfulness. So this class is basically you meet once a week and there's a professor who leads that and you meditate for 1 hour. And then you're also asked to meditate every hour and it's recorded, and that's how the scores are determined. And I actually did that. I tried doing it for most of the days and it was very influential. I still do mindfulness. I think everyone should take that class. Everyone loved it, whoever took it. And the third one I'll call out, this is more tech focused, but my absolute favorite class by Ethan Mollick. Ethan Mollick teaches a lot of technology strategy and entrepreneurship. I took his entrepreneurship class. He brings the latest and greatest to the class. So he is really plugged into the industry. If you follow him on Twitter, X, I guess, you'll see that he is like testing all of this Gen AI, everything that's coming out, he will like have tested it the next day and like he'll have an update on that. And he brings all of that context to the class, and all of the projects and exercises are based on like the latest and greatest in tech that's happening. So really cool class for folks who are trying to do entrepreneurship, trying to get into tech. He also has a very interesting data-based approach to entrepreneurship that I really enjoyed. So he brings a lot of stats. Entrepreneurship is kind of like, there's a lot of stories around it and it's kind of like romanticized. Hey, it's an 18-year-old in a garage starting a startup kind of approach. So I really enjoyed it. I highly recommend that class too.
Love it. And very different courses as well, all of the ones that you specified.
Yes, so I didn't want to like give the usual ones. These were like
Yeah,
sort of just a fun courses for a lot of folks.
very cool. And so you pursued a double major at Wharton, right? So why did you do it? And is it
Yeah.
common for students to pursue multiple majors?
Yeah. So honestly, majors don't matter at all. So the concept of a major, the way you have it in India, right? Like I did my engineering in electronics, it's very different from concept of majors here in the US. In India, your whole curriculum is based around that major. And you might be able to take like few courses outside of it, but it's mostly that. Versus in the US, getting a major is essentially meeting certain requirements of courses that are required for that major. Most folks don't think about it much. In the second year, you see which major you are close to having all the requirements for, you're interested in, and then you go for it. And the second smallish benefit is signaling effects. If you want to signal to your employers that, hey, I've done entrepreneurship or I've done management or all any of these, then it helps with that. In terms of coursework, it doesn't impact it much, to be honest. So going back to the two majors, right? I think it's pretty common for the international folks to do business analytics, a couple of majors that allow you to take STEM OPT. What it means is it allows you to like stay in the US without an H-1B for I think 24 months longer. So that major is pretty typical. You go for it. It's easy to do. And then I did another major in entrepreneurship, and it was mostly because of a lot of courses that I wanted to take were in that major. And that's how a lot of folks approach it.
Okay, that's really helpful. And the extension on the OPT for 24 months, that's in addition to the 12 months you get anyways, right? So it's for a
That is
total
correct.
of 36 months.
That is correct. I would check those numbers. It's been 6 years,
Right, right.
but yes, there
I'm
is an
fairly
extension.
sure about that. I'm just
Okay, there you
stating
go.
that for the benefit of our audience and listeners.
Okay, perfect.
And for aspiring techies, Suyog, what are the best academic resources that Wharton offers?
I think Penn Engineering, like I said, is a school that you can take courses from. A lot of folks took courses in machine learning and data science. There are courses for programming. A lot of folks I know learn Java and Python by taking courses there. So highly, highly recommended. If you want to break into the tech industry, especially if you don't come from tech background, if you don't have computer science, or if you have not previously worked in some tech role, then best way to do that is take a bunch of those courses. They are very, very intensive. Plus, they have a lot of like projects that you do on the side, and those projects help you signal to your employers that, hey, I've actually built this, I have experience doing this. And it's a perfect way to do that. Second thing I would say is that you can go a bit deeper here is you can also actually do a combined degree in engineering when you're doing your MBA. And then that requires you to take a bunch of courses from Penn Engineering. I know some folks have done it. It's very intensive and very demanding. But if you're really serious about breaking into tech, that's a great way to signal and also just like build an amazing skill set.
And this can be done by folks who didn't have an engineering undergrad as well?
Yes, it can be done by everyone.
Okay, that's helpful. And I want to move into something fun again. we do the back and forth, fun, boring. Tell us about the activities and clubs you were involved with, and what did you do in each role, and what's the club slash activity about as well. So maybe we can start with Follies.
Wharton Follies is like the majority of my time outside of academics. Wharton Follies, just to tell everyone what it is, it's a student club that performs a musical at the end of the year. The musical is mostly there to like poke fun at the student body and the administration. And there are writers who write the show, and there are actors and singers who perform it. I was one of the writers. It's a very intensive experience. You spend most of your weekdays with your Follies writers writing for the show that's going to happen. We also record a bunch of like YouTube videos where all of the writers kind of act and perform. Amazing experience. I was surrounded by some of the funniest people I've known. And also coming as an international student, as an Indian to this group, it's an interesting window into the American culture because so much of humor comes from like shared context, which I was missing most of the times. And I had to ask, hey, I didn't get that. Like, why is that funny? And they would take time to explain it to me. They were so kind about it. And it kind of like built my context of like the American culture. So amazing, amazing experience. So anyone who wants to go for it, I would say definitely do. Just be aware that it takes over your life. There's just massive time commitment, but it's an amazing way to spend 2 years at Wharton.
Okay, very cool. And what was the selection process like? Because the thing you just talked about, the context that you were missing, I was going to ask you exactly about that, right? So, how did you manage to get selected for it, specifically given you were an international student who didn't have that context?
So the selection process is a lot of fun. You show up to a pub, you're asked to sort of perform 2 minute sketch, and you can prepare what you want. And I could bring my own spin to some of these things, and that was easier. And I've been in theater for a long time and like writing for a long time. So there's a lot of fun. And then there are like multiple stages. So first you perform, you get selected, then you go to the next round, you're asked to do some more, and finally you kind of get selected. And that's the whole process that a lot of folks go through. Yeah, and that's how I got in. So that was easier because I could bring like my context to it. But then when you're into it and you're writing with everyone, that's where those like missing context becomes apparent.
Yeah, what led you to pick this activity? It's unusual for international students to pick this up.
It is, yeah. So I think it's mostly because of my background. I have done theater in my undergrad. I used to perform, like I said, street plays in India. I used to write for it. And I've always been very interested in drama, theater, writing. And I knew I was going to do this even before I went. It was like, oh, this is kind of a really easy fit for me. So yeah, always been interested in that. It is unusual for a lot of internationals to join, but you do see it in a lot of the singers and the actors. There are a lot of internationals. In writing, yes, it is slightly harder, but yeah, I wanted to do it.
Okay, very cool. And how do you think it enriched your experience? And maybe did it also play a role in some of those recruiting conversations as well?
It does in recruiting, actually. So, Wharton Follies is the folks who are performing and the folks who are writing it kind of establish an instant cred within the community because a lot of that poking the fun, right, is knowing what's happening in the student body, poking fun at like different controversies and incidences. So, you have a lot of credibility. So, when you go for recruiting conversations and you tell them that, hey, I've been doing Wharton Follies, they instantly like want to talk to you about it. And that helps with a lot of social aspects of recruiting. So, yeah, I had that experience. It was a lot of fun. In terms of enriching my experience, right, the whole experience is very intensive. So you spend a lot of time leading up to the show, writing for it, and when the show happens, there's so much going on to make it a success. Plus, you are shooting a YouTube video, and like that was also such an interesting performing like sketches in a YouTube video was also such a new experience. I think a lot of Wharton is all about having new experiences. And Wharton Follies gave me so many of those and so many enriching experiences. I'm really grateful for it.
Yeah, wonderful. I also want to talk about another thing you participated in, which is the large group ventures. So maybe you could touch upon that as well.
Just for context for everyone, Wharton does this thing called ventures, where these are really sort of extreme, demanding, outdoorsy activities. Like you could sail in the Caribbean. That's what I did. So there's like small group ventures and large group ventures. This one was small group venture, where what we did was we took a sailboat from a country called Grenada in the Caribbeans, and we sailed it and learned how to sail it with the captain. There were like six of us on the sailboat, and we spent 7 days on the ocean, not stepping on land at all. It was amazing. It was a very, very intensive experience when you're sailing with like 5 and 6 foot waves, and the whole boat turns if you're doing it right. And it's a pretty extreme experience. So a lot of fun, and you're spending time with like six folks, cooking on the boat, living on the boat, doing everything on the boat. You're sharing a like such a small bed with one of the six folks, and It's a very intensive experience. So really enjoyed it. So there are a bunch of other experiences. You can go to Antarctica for 14 days and hike there. You can hike the Andes. That's another like large group venture. There are many of those if you go, and they're all amazing experiences, because the interesting thing is that for these experiences, Wharton like brings the most qualified team to take the team out there and teach them how to do these things. So it's very safe, yet very extreme and risky. So it's a great way to do something and put yourself out of your comfort zone. Man, I would have never done something like this, like 7 days on a sailing boat. But just because it was at Wharton and you're in kind of the rush of things and everyone's trying new things, I pushed myself to do it. And I'm so grateful I did that.
Very cool. And do you swim?
I do swim.
Okay,
Yes.
so cool.
I
So
think
at least you didn't have
sort
to
of,
battle that fear.
yes, that would have been hard without that.
Okay, cool. Now I want to move on to a very important topic as well that our listeners would be very interested in, which is recruiting. So, can we talk about your job search process at Wharton? Maybe we can talk about for internship first, because it was
Yeah.
very different, right? Like the investment banking internship.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I went to Wharton, my goal was to get into finance and to banking. And that's what I did for the internship. I was aiming for investment banking. The good news is for a lot of these structured recruitment industries like banking, consulting, there is such a large support system in Wharton. For my internship, I was going for investment banking, which was my goal. Typically, the way this starts is you join the investment banking club. It's a student-run body, typically run by the second years who have done investment banking in the summers and are going to their investment banking jobs. They give you a lot of guidance, so it's very structured. You know exactly what to prepare for. You know exactly what the interviews are going to be, and then the investment banks start kind of like descending on Philly. So they come to Philly with a lot of associates will come to Philly and hold a lot of like social events, starting with like your resumes goes to all of these investment banks. They start inviting you for all of these social events. It could be just like drinks, dinner, and these social events start getting like more and more selective. So after the first social event with say JP Morgan, for the next event, maybe 80% of those folks will be invited. Then it goes to the next social event. And it's very much determined by how you speak to a lot of them, how your resume looks like. And your investment banking club is there to support you along this like whole journey. They will tell you exactly how to act in this social setting. It's really funny, but it is how it works. And like a reality show, you keep getting selected from one step to the next. And the last step is the interviews. So all of the investment banks and folks come down to Philly, and the interviews happen typically within a day or two, and you start finding out where you got an offer from. I ended up giving interviews with like 3 or 4 banks and got an offer from William Blair. I wanted to go for technology investment banking because that's tech is the industry I came from. It is a very demanding experience. It takes a lot of prep, but the good news is there's so many people around you going through the same experience and so many people to share their experience with you and support you. You never have a question about the process that's not answered. So you just have to do what you're told and you will get the job if you like put in the right effort. So really fun experience. Yeah, I ended up going to William Blair for the summer.
Just one question. What are the interviews like?
The investment banking interviews are a combination of sort of an accounting balance sheet interview. A typical question is, say depreciation goes up by $10. How does it flow through the balance sheet? Sort of what happens to the balance sheet, what happens to the income statement, etc. And there's like a bunch of resources that the club will give you to prep for all of these questions. And then there's a bunch of behavioral questions. Tell me about a time sort of questions. That's very typical. And the third thing that helps with a lot of these recruiting for investment banking is knowing your industry really well. So doing the social conversations, knowing your industry, asking inquisitive questions, showing that you have prepped and you know what you're talking about, those things help a lot too.
Okay, that's helpful. So that was you landing the internship. Maybe you can speak a little bit about the internship experience as well, being in Bay Area as well.
Yeah, so being in Bay Area was interesting. Bay Area is a very, very expensive place to stay, but I stayed in a hostel during my internship. And doing investment banking is a very physically and mentally demanding job. So I stayed on Columbia Street, I think, and walked to my work every day. And typically the hours you would work, at least at that time, were really high. Like 80, 90-hour week wasn't uncommon. And most of my internship was like that. I also filled in for one of the associates that had left at that point. So a bit of an unusual situation, but my workload was even more demanding than it typically is for investment banking. So overall, the experience really helped me understand that was not for me. So I still think it was a very valuable experience. It kind of made me realize that I wanted to go back to tech. And yeah, I had an offer to go back to William Blair, but I had to say no to them. People at William Blair are really, really good. And the culture is really amazing. It's just the nature of the job that is very demanding and it's different.
Okay, understood. So you knew immediately after you didn't want to go back into banking, and then you decided to focus on tech. So how did you go about the full-time job search at that point?
Yeah, when I decided that I wanted to transition out of banking to tech, tech is a slightly different recruitment process versus banking. While banking and consulting are very structured, tech is not. There are a lot of tech companies have their own processes that look very, very different. And a lot of them, you fly out to interview them. Not a lot of companies come down to Philly, but
Do
the
they
support
pay for you
systems,
to fly out?
they typically do, yes. If you're going for interviews, yeah. Now everything happens virtually. Back then, you used to go in person. But the support system that is there for consulting, banking, a similar one is there for tech. Wharton Tech Club is probably one of the most popular and big clubs. And that speaks to the strength Wharton has with tech, actually. So it's a massive club with a lot of resources. And then the way this works is a lot of companies who are hiring for full-time roles will start posting those roles on the Wharton job site, and you apply for those, and then each company has their process which looks different. So you have to sort of find your own way. The student body and the Wharton Tech Club provides you a lot of resources for resume reviews, making sure that your resume speaks to and is very compelling for these companies. There is a bunch of resources for interview prep. So you create groups where you can interview and do mock interviews quite a lot. And then you sort of go through each individual company's process separately. There's typically some timeline that the companies have to stick to, and a lot of large big tech companies stick to that timeline, like Microsoft, Google, but then a lot of the smaller ones don't, and they work fairly independently.
Okay, understood. So you were benefiting from all these resources that you just spoke about. So when exactly were you applying for these roles, and how did your process go exactly till the time you landed that job with AWS?
A lot of the big tech companies starts earlier, starts in sort of in the fall, right when you come back from your internships, you get into the grind of finding a full-time job if what you did in the summer internship is not your full-time job. So it starts in the fall. You start applying to a lot of companies during that time. And then typically there are like 2 or 3 rounds for each of these companies. So Amazon, for example, had a phone interview round. And once you have cleared that, then there's a on site where there are like 5 interviews back to back that you have to go through. Something like Google had, I think, 3 rounds where there's like a phone interview round, there's another interview, and then there is a on site. Typically, a lot of these big tech companies will give you offers during the fall and before like November, December timeline, it will get done. Then a lot of smaller companies, the process will go on in the new year and up until graduation, really you can have a lot of companies still recruiting at that time. So I got a job with Amazon pretty early on during the fall. I decided to take that. There's also an interesting dynamic here where you have to select like which offers you take because you might have some interviews going on, but if the timing doesn't line up, you have to take the offer and drop the others. Wharton does help you with this, where it has a lot of rules where companies have to give you at least a certain amount of time before they can push you to make a decision. That is very helpful, actually. A lot of other companies now, when I recruit, they don't do that. But Wharton gives that kind of like safety net for you, and they force a lot of these companies to give you enough time to make a informed decision.
Okay, cool. And did the fact that you did not have a bachelor's degree in computer science put you at a disadvantage in recruiting for PM roles?
I don't think so, actually, because my role first is when I started working was software engineering, and then I was working in sort of a tech organization at Credit Suisse. It was never an issue. My previous experience was as a product manager at Credit Suisse, so both of those helped quite a lot. For folks who did not have computer science background, it can be a hurdle. And what helps there? First, you have to be selective which companies you go for. So some companies are more open to non-tech background versus others. Amazon, for example, is more open. Google is likely not. So you have to select the right companies. Second, I think showing a lot of examples of how you're making up for that, making up for the lack of tech background is very helpful. So previously I was talking about taking courses in pen engineering. That is super helpful. You should do that. And that kind of like signals that you have the interest. And most folks who can do that can go for it. And the third thing I would say is that you can be selective in the type of roles you apply for. So engineering background is required or is important for something like product management, but not so much for strategy or biz dev. So you can be more selective in what roles you want to go for.
Right. Who were the major tech employers at the time? You talked about Google, you talked about Amazon, maybe Microsoft, and who were some of the others?
Yeah, the usual suspects. So Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft, Google hired quite a lot from Wharton. Others like Dell, Cisco, I think Uber, almost all like large companies you
Right.
would
And they
think
all
of.
hire
Yeah.
international students as well.
Most of them, yes. One example comes to mind. Facebook, Meta, did not hire internationals in product management roles, but they did hire internationals in data scientists, data analytics roles. Some companies like Meta were more selective. Most others, though were open to internationals.
Okay, understood. And what about the MBA career management staff, right? Or team? Did that have a role to play in your full-time or internship recruitment process?
They definitely did. I think a lot of these resources and kind of pulling together this structure comes from them. So they are setting the structure, they are maintaining the job site, they are communicating with the companies, setting the requirements, setting the events, inviting all of these folks to Wharton to talk to the student body. So they do a lot of behind the scene kind of setup for recruiting to work as it does. They also offer a lot of office hours so you can go and talk to them about your resume, which industries you should target. They have a wealth of knowledge, and I leverage that quite a lot. So, most importantly for me, when I was making the transition from investment banking and going to tech, I spent a lot of time with the career management office, kind of explaining my situation, explaining my experience, and kind of ratifying my decision making and making sure it was the right decision. And that pivot, right? I was pretty nervous about it because you did investment banking, you're now completing a 180-degree turn. So they helped me through a lot of that process, how I should target different companies, what companies look for. So definitely a huge, huge resource for a lot of students. Another thing I'll mention is that they also help with offer negotiations quite a lot. So if you have multiple offers, deciding between them, evaluating them, they help with that too.
Okay, got it. And were you negotiating your offers as well?
Not really. A lot of these large big tech companies, because they have such structured recruitment programs, their compensation philosophy is also very structured, meaning, hey, this is what we give to all of our new graduates who come and join our program for this role, for this location, and that's it. There's no room for negotiation.
Understood.
Negotiation becomes a big lever for more smaller companies who do not have the structured programs and their flexibility and opportunity to talk about compensation.
Understood. What is that starting threshold for PM roles at a company like Amazon?
I think at Amazon right now it's around $250,000 for new graduates. They typically join as an L6 product manager, which is the senior product manager designation at Amazon.
Okay, that's helpful. And how can aspiring product managers prepare for job interviews? You talked about product sense, and maybe you can
Yeah,
talk about some other aspects.
there is typically three buckets of interviews for product. There is analytical execution type of questions. These are typically like metric based. I'll give you an example. Say tomorrow the daily active users on Instagram drops by 10%. You are the PM for the home feed. What would you do about it? So these type of questions, which kind of like test your analytical skills, how you think about metrics and problem solving and execution, are very typical. The second bucket is behavioral. These are your tell me over time type of question. And the third is product sense, design a product for blah kind of questions. The way I would approach these product interviews and what I would recommend is first understand the context, like what is expected from these questions, what type of questions you would encounter. There are many resources online for this. When you're at Wharton, obviously the Tech Club is an amazing resource that will help you with all of this. If you want more external resources, there are companies like Exponent Alliance that you can go online. They offer courses that kind of tell you exactly what these questions expect and have a bunch of examples that you can go through. Once you're done that and you have kind of a framework of what's required, then I would say just like practice, practice, practice. Interviewing for product roles, like any other, sort of a muscle that you have to build and it just takes a lot of repetitions, especially the product sense interviews. It took me a long time to get the hang of that. So I know folks who did so many mock interviews, like 50, 100 mock interviews, and you do what's needed, right? And when you're at
Who are you
Wharton,
mocking with?
so when you're at Wharton, you can do it with everyone else who's also interviewing for tech. So there's such a large student body again that comes into play here. So in your tech club, people who are applying for say Google interviews, there's so many of them. You'll find a lot of there's so many folks to like interview and do mock interviews with. That's one. Second, you should also do it with the folks who are going into these roles, so who have gotten an offer. So second years, you can spend time with them and get their experience. And the third, you can actually reach out to a lot of alumni from these companies and interview with them. I remember doing a bunch of mock interviews with Google PMs from Wharton who had joined in the last couple of years. And that's the benefit of Wharton alumni. So there's a lot of folks in tech industry and they're very open to helping the folks who are right now trying for the same thing.
Oh, that's amazing. That is incredible. And do you interview candidates for PM roles? And if yes, what are the common characteristics in candidates that impress you?
Yeah, I interview quite a lot. So the three things I'll call out that are always helpful. The first is you typically want someone who can show a lot of kind of first principles thinking. A lot of folks prep for these interviews, right? And Google can sometimes throw like a left curve and just randomize some of the questions, which is helpful because you see how folks kind of like react under pressure and how they can think on their feet. That I really enjoy. So if I give a question that they're not expecting, I would love to see them kind of like go back to first principles and think about the basics and start from there. The second thing I would say is that having a lot of structure in your answers. So even when you don't know exactly how to get to the answer or what the answer looks like. Just the act of finding the right structure to solve it is very, very helpful. So if you can break down the problems into individual components, think about each of those components, be very honest that, hey, I don't know how to solve this, but this is how I would potentially approach it. That is a great start because at work, that's how it typically is. You don't know the answer. You just have to figure out the part to get there and break it down into like individual components. And the third thing I would say is that really strong prep. Like folks who show up really prepped shows a lot of agency, and that's really important at work. And this is most apparent in the type of questions they ask you. So at the end of the interview, I'll offer them 5-10 minutes to ask me questions. And folks who are prepped well will have really good questions and inquisitive questions and insightful questions. I love having a good conversation. If it's a typical, hey, how's the culture at your team? It's a pretty boring question to answer to. But if you ask an interesting question about the product, we can have a good conversation and we leave at high note. That's the third thing I would say. Very underappreciated, actually, but it's really important that you show prepped and ask good questions to the interviewer.
Yeah. Can you give me an example of a question you were recently asked that you really love?
So I work in YouTube shopping. We are trying to build a lot of e-commerce experiences for brands and retailers and creators on YouTube. And I recently had an interview. They asked me a question about geographic expansion. If we had considered entering a new geography and why he felt it was actually a good fit for our product. He brought a lot of insights. And that's so interesting because he had spent time learning about our product and then going a step further and thinking about how he can actually improve it. So he brought a lot of insights and he said that, what do you think about that? Is that a good idea? Like, are you planning to do that? And there was a good conversation. We started going back and forth on some of the insights he had brought and debugging that. And during that, I also offered him a ton of insight about a product, which he can't himself have found from everything that's out there. So it also gives the interviewee an opportunity to learn more about the product. So really fun question versus tell me about a day in your team.
Love it. And so, what does the current recruiting environment in tech look like? Can you speak a little bit about how the numbers have shifted? For example, like maybe there's a 30% drop compared to, say, 2 years, 3 years ago.
I don't have the numbers, but it is hard right now. A lot of basically headcount budgets that are being offered are very constrained. So you have to make a very strong case for why you need to hire. And it's gotten to such an extreme where if someone leaves your team, it's hard to even get a backfill for that. So it is a pretty tough environment right now in the tech industry. And I have my personal experience at Google and the way it looks like. But from my friends and what I see, a lot of folks are recruiting, they want to switch jobs. Like interview invites are hard to come by. And even when they do come by, the pool of candidate that is applying is so large and so qualified, it's harder for you to stand out and to get the gig. So definitely very different from 2020, 2021, when there was a massive hiring spree and you could get all sorts of jobs.
Understood. You transitioned during the hiring spree or after?
Right before it ended. So I was very fortunate. Yeah. So once I had finished my recruiting, that's when job offers started getting rescinded and big layoffs started. So I was fortunate there.
Okay, that's pretty cool. And if you could go back in time, what's one thing you would do differently to make the most of your Wharton experience?
So for Wharton, I would say that say yes more is my advice to everyone and also to myself if I could go back. There are so many things that Wharton offers. Say yes to that dinner that you got invited to, this activity which is outside of your comfort zone, and do that. You would never regret trying new things and trying more things. Personally, I could have done a lot more at Wharton. So yeah, that would have been the thing.
Okay, great advice. And had you not gone to the US to pursue an MBA from Wharton, how would your life be different from the one you're currently leading?
I think it would be very different for me personally. Coming to the US and going to Wharton has given me an opportunity to work with some of the smartest folks I know and really passionate folks at a company like YouTube. If I was back in India, I probably wouldn't have had this opportunity. And that's not to say that India doesn't have this opportunity. It actually has a lot and it's improving massively. Like right now, the tech scene in India is amazing. Some incredible companies are working in India, and a lot of companies here have like a basis in India, which are doing amazing work. But personally, for me, because I did not come from the traditional IIT background, I don't think those opportunities would have been accessible to me. So for me, the easiest part to get those was coming here and doing an MBA. So it might differ for everyone, but for me, it would have been very different.
Okay, fair. And so you're given you made a couple of transitions since graduating, right? One is Twitch, the other is Google. Can
Yeah.
you talk a little bit about how you made those transitions? Because you also talked about relying on the network quite a bit.
Yeah.
So, how exactly was it something you applied for on LinkedIn or was it through a referral? Just like Break it down for us.
I'll give you context on the switches itself, right? It is atypical, these many switches. Most folks you won't see in the first 5 years have switched so many jobs. But for me, it was important because product management is sort of a nebulous term. It could mean very different things in different companies, in different products, in different teams within like a company, even. So for me, it was really important to figure out try a lot of different versions of product management, figure out like what aspects I like the most. So my first switch from AWS to Twitch was to try a consumer product instead of an enterprise product. And that's what I tried. I really enjoyed it. And then from Twitch to YouTube, I was actually at that point looking for a 0 to 1 opportunity. Instead of working on an established product and building iterative features, I wanted to start from scratch and have that kind of steep growth curve. So YouTube shopping at that point was just kicking off. So I had an opportunity. I was one of the first 2 PMs working on this products. And I could build something from scratch. So that's really the motivation here. And the way this typically works is when you want to make a switch, the best way to do that is to know someone in the company you want to apply for. Getting a referral from them, learning about the company from them, and doing a mock interview with them is really helpful. And that's where the Wharton network kicks in. So when you search on LinkedIn, a lot of your classmates, you will find someone working in the company that you're interested in, or you'll find someone who knows someone who's working in that company. And you just follow that. You find someone, ask them to make an introduction to them. And the Wharton is always kind of a connecting tissue there. So you can bring up Wharton and like talk about their experiences and then get an in essentially. So that was very helpful for me. For me personally, also, a lot of my kind of like home base here and my core set of friends in the US are from Wharton, and a lot of them are in tech. So that's my support group to brainstorm about recruiting, do interview prep. A lot of us recruited together. So we would do a lot of like mock interviews together. So again, where like Wharton has helped me quite a lot. And the third thing I'll say is sort of a different point here is that versus other industries like investment banking and consulting, tech actually does not give that much importance to which school you went to or was it Wharton, Stanford. It doesn't actually matter at tech. So network is really what it is. And you don't get extra brownie points for going to a specific school during the recruiting process, which you might in some other industries. So that's important to keep in mind.
Okay. If you don't get brownie points for going to a school, how then is the network relevant? Just the fact that somebody's in that company?
Yeah, so it's essentially getting to speak with someone and getting the referral to that company and getting to know about that company. That's where the network helps quite a lot. And again, if you can build like a core set of friends and folks who you can rely on, that's another ways it's very helpful. And Wharton has such a strength in tech. There's so many folks in tech that you can lean on. That's where it helps. Just because you went to Wharton, no hiring manager is going to give you any like extra points for it. So that doesn't happen in tech.
Okay, understood. That's helpful. And you were learning about these opportunities through the people who were working there.
Yeah, so LinkedIn is an amazing source. That's how you sort of find these opportunities. Then you talk to folks in these companies. This is true for a lot of like large companies, like big tech. If you want to join smaller companies, then network is more helpful. You won't find all of the jobs on LinkedIn. You might, but then you won't have a whole lot of information. You won't know what's happening with that. So if you want to try for smaller companies, like when I was recruiting the last time, I also wanted to try like smaller startups because I was looking for 0 to 1 opportunities. And a lot of my kind of leads came from folks who were in that industry and knew smaller startups. And I would see the job online, but the company is not so well known where I would know exactly what to make of it. So if I can find someone who's working in the industry, for example, when I was recruiting, I did interview with a couple of Web3 companies, and I know a lot of folks from Wharton who are into the Web3 industries, have been in the industry for a while, and they have so much kind of like context and knowledge. So I leaned on them to evaluate these companies, understand what the future was, what they were doing, and it was very, very helpful. So for big tech, it's mostly like referrals. But if you go for smaller startups, then having that network is very, very powerful.
Understood. And is it only your classmates you were relying on, or was it also people who were part of the Wharton network, but people that you did not know previously?
It's both. So definitely classmates. That's the easier route. So if you can find someone who you went to school with, plus like if you know them from those 2 years, it's very easy. But I wouldn't be afraid to just like cold emailing someone.
And people were replying even.
Yeah. Typically the hit rate is better if you reach out to someone who's gone to Wharton and strike that connection versus someone who's not and there's no connecting point, right? So it definitely helps. And a lot of Wharton folks and alumni want to help others.
Okay, very helpful. And so, what does a day in your life as a product lead at Google look like? What kind of problems are you solving in the merchant vertical of YouTube shopping?
So what we are trying to do is we're trying to make YouTube a shopping destination. We want viewers to come to YouTube, find products from the creators that they trust, and be able to like buy them seamlessly. As you can imagine, there are like three actors here, right? There's viewers who are watching YouTube, there's creators who are making content, and then there are merchants or brands like Target, Walmart that are promoting their products. So I look after the all of the merchants and the brand side. For me, I'm currently in an interesting role that's for PMs where you go from being an IC to start leading a team. It's one of those like pivotal moments for a lot of product managers. It's interesting because you have
What is an
obviously
IC? Sorry.
IC is an individual contributor, meaning you don't have a team reporting to you, you're contributing as an individual. So this transition from going from individual contributor to managing a team is pretty important one for PMs. And it's interesting because as an IC, you have built a lot of credibility and you have mastered a lot of traits that are needed to be successful. And that's why people want you to start leading a team. But when you do that, the skill set that's needed immediately switches and it's very different. So it's an interesting kind of, oh, I used to know how to do my job, but now it's a completely different skill set. That's an interesting thing that I'm going through since last year. So you have to build a lot of skills in building a strong team, hiring the right folks. So I spent a lot of my time in the last 12 months hiring my team and finding the right mix of people, making sure they all fit together is really important. So that's been like new learning. Another thing I would say is that that's been interesting in this role is you're leading a team, but also you're responsible for the setting the strategy for the product. So questions like which geography should our product expand to, which merchants and brands we should integrate with and we should partner with. A lot of those questions someone in my role has to answer. So it's an interesting managing plus leading the product strategy mix. So my typical day would look like basically full of meetings. So what I'm trying to do is make sure that no one is blocked, make sure that I can unblock folks and I can support my team as they are like building things. I provide the right context to them. I provide the right resources to them. I'm kind of a support structure to help them do really well. So that's what my days look like. A lot of these meetings are also like a lot of hard product and strategy decisions where you're trying to make trade-offs and make the right call. Someone has brought a proposal that you review and provide feedback on. So that's sort of what my day is, just talking to people all day.
Awesome. That's really helpful context. So, can you speak a little bit about what living in Seattle looks like? Maybe talk about the neighborhood you live in, how you spend your weekends, and are you in contact with Wharton alumni? You mentioned that you are, I believe.
I am, yes. So when we came to Wharton from B school, we had a group of like 20 folks who all came to Seattle, joined Microsoft, Amazon. Actually, we lived in like one apartment building for a year and a half, which was amazing. It was kind of, we didn't want to let go of the Wharton community. It was a lot of fun. Still, my core set of friends come from Wharton and are who I spend most of my time with. I'm a big fan of Seattle. It has mixed reviews. The reason it has mixed reviews is it has like two sides to it. The winters are really depressing. There is not a whole lot of sunlight. There is a lot of rain, and not a lot of people like go out during such time. They all become hermits. The summers on the other side are amazing. It's sunny, it's beautiful, the temperature is very moderate, and Seattle is such a beautiful place. There are a lot of like national parks and state parks in the Seattle area. There are four of them actually, and they're all beautiful. It's called the Emerald State because it's like green for 12 months. So when the summers come out, everyone's going out. There are a bunch of lakes here. There's a lot of outdoorsy activities to do. So if you're into hiking, Seattle is kind of a paradise. So typically what my wife and I we do is we break up the winters into like pieces. So it works for us because in December we go to India. So 1 month is like gone away. And then in Jan, Feb, we typically go to more sunny places. We'll go to Hawaii or Mexico. Again, break up that winter. And by the time we are back, it's spring and summer, which we are in right now. And we love that weather, so we don't mind it at all. So Seattle is beautiful if you can figure out a way to deal with the lack of sunlight and if you're okay with the rain. Those two things don't bother you, amazing place, hands down. You also asked about weekends, right? Yeah, typically weekends here, if it's summer, a lot of outdoorsy activity. We'll go out to one of the national parks, to hiking, or when it's winter, we spend a lot of time with our friends playing board games. And that's what it typically looks like. What else is important? Another thing important for folks to know is US has a dual tax system. There's a federal tax and there's a state tax. And one attractiveness of Seattle is that it's in Washington state, which has no state tax. So it's a lot of people like that. You save a lot more money than compared to like SF. So it's more affordable than compared to SF. You save more taxes, yes. And there are a lot of companies here. Amazon has obviously headquarters here. Microsoft does too, and all other companies. Google has a massive campus, multiple campuses here with a lot of roles. So it's a good place.
Okay, very cool. Gives us a great idea. And what neighborhood do you currently live in?
Yeah, so I live on the east side. It's called Bellevue. So there's a Seattle main city, there's Bellevue. Bellevue is more of a quiet family location. We moved here during the pandemic because we no longer had to like go to work and we wanted more space. and our parents were visiting. So for Indians specifically, this would be helpful. Bellevue and Redmond have pretty substantial Indian population. That was one of the reasons why we made the switch. We wanted our parents to find a community, find other folks that they can spend time with, which they definitely did in Bellevue. It's harder to do in Seattle. So yes, we've been here since the pandemic. My wife commutes to work. It's about like 30 minutes drive to Seattle. I work from home and I'm remote.
Okay, very cool. And you also talked about those vacations, right, to India, Mexico, and all of those places. So I was under the impression that you get 2 weeks of paid vacation every year. So how do you manage so much vacation time?
Yeah. So varies from company to company. Some companies like Amazon, yes, has a pretty limited set of holidays you can take. Twitch used to have a lot more holidays, for example. And many companies nowadays say they have unlimited vacation. You can take how much of a vacation you want. It doesn't work out that way, but the sentiment is there. So typically the way you take these vacations, you combine it with like long weekends, other national holidays that we have, you would use them and take a couple of days to like create a nice sort of 10-day vacation you can go for. And another thing is in December, for example, when we go to India, our jobs allow us to like work remotely, which is great. A lot of other jobs don't. So a lot of our India trips, the way it looks like is we would have a couple of weeks of vacation, but the rest of the time we're actually working from India. And I actually have a team in India. So for me, it's like I'll visit the team, I'll work, spend time there, and then the rest of the time I'll take vacation.
Ah, gotcha. That's really helpful as well, logistically. So, can you also talk about your student loan? How much loan did you take, and how much of it have you been able to pay off in 5 years?
Yeah, of course. We spoke about I had a scholarship about 50, 60K when I joined Wharton. Overall cost of 2 years, that includes the tuition, but also the expenditures and personal expenditures, I think comes out to around like 200, 210. This was in 2017 and 19. Those are the years that I went. It must have increased now. So for the rest of that amount outside of that scholarship, I took a loan. I took a loan from Prodigy Finance. They are one of those go-to companies for MBA loans. They offer loans without any collateral, which is very helpful. And the way it works is they basically pay Wharton and pay you for personal expenditures and pay Wharton for tuition directly. And then the interest accrues for 2 years and you start paying monthly installments after you get a full-time job, which is like obviously a very helpful feature. I have paid off my loans. I think when I graduated, the loan I had was around like 160, 170K. I did the monthly installments for a while and then just like paid it off. It's typically what I would say is that if you getting one of these jobs in tech industry or investment banking or consulting, you can pay it off within 3, 4 years if you want to. Many people don't do that because it's a low interest loan that they want to keep around and invest instead. So that's a perfectly reasonable way to do it. I paid it off though. Yeah.
Okay, very cool. And so, given rising tuition costs and a difficult recruiting and immigration environment, is an American MBA still worth it for international students? Why?
Man, I think I'm going to give you an annoying answer, which is it depends. I think, but I will share some strong opinions and like data points. The first thing I'll say is that the tuition cost, right? I think it should be a big factor in decision making. This used to be the case, right? And here's what I mean. I came from no money, well, negative money, and I've been fine. I know a lot of folks who have done that. You get a lot of loans. If you get into a good school, and specifically in the top 15, 20 schools, you get loans, like I mentioned, Prodigy Finance. And if you have a game plan to get one of these high paying jobs, and many of them are high paying, you will be able to pay it off. And over the long term, it really wouldn't matter. Those tuition fees don't really matter much. If there's a job that you can only get via an MBA, I think the tuition fee shouldn't be a big concern for you. Immigration is an interesting one. Immigration has been getting harder over time, but there are still a lot of ways to cut down the green card process of H1B. You could go to a different country and come back on L1A. That expedites your green card process. You could apply for an investment visa at some point, or you could go for EB1A, where you show a lot of expertise in a specific field and get a lot of referrals from notable folks. A lot of folks do that. It seems daunting, but it's actually a very, very common path that a lot of folks take. So I would say immigration is a pain, but it can be solved. And the third thing, which I think is important is, and this is where we get into like opinion territory, but I feel like as you grow older, what I've realized is that the value of life is the number of new things that you experience and try. And MBA gives you this like 2 year package of all the new things and amazing things you can do and exposes you to so much diversity. You can do it on your own, but for someone like lazy as me, it just like packages everything and you go for it and you're full time there and you're experiencing it. That package is amazing. It's an expensive package, but it's totally worth it. So I would say depends. Think about all of these benefits, right? Think about what you want to do And if you can get there without an MBA, great. You don't need it. In my case, I couldn't get to where I want to be without an MBA, so I went for it. That's the calculation to do. And keep the long-term trajectory in mind. Things like tuition fees, which are very like short-term things, shouldn't be that big of a concern.
Understood. And did you and your wife, did you get the H1B as part of the lottery in the first attempt?
We both did, yes.
Okay.
So going back to that OPT stuff, right? So if you do the STEM OPT, which is possible with a lot of MBA programs, then you get 3 attempts at an H1B lottery. And most folks get it. There are a few folks that I know who did not get in 3 attempts. And actually, no, 2 such cases. One was investment banking, one was with Amazon. In both of those cases, their respective companies sent them to offshore locations. So the Amazon person went to Canada, the one who was in investment banking went to London, and they both came back after a year on L1A. And now they're actually getting their green cards done in like a year and a half. So it actually worked out great for them. The whole process was very stressful for them as they were not getting through the lottery, but ultimately it did work out. If you're in one of these like large companies that have international basis, they will send you to the international location. Yeah. So that's something you can take into account when you're applying for companies, and you can apply for larger, bigger companies to have that safety net.
Makes sense. And what's your parting advice, Suyog, on how incoming students can be better prepared to maximize their time as part of the MBA program?
One thing that I did not do, but I found very helpful was if you're trying to make industry switch or a function switch, like if, for example, if you come from consulting background and you want to join product management in tech, I would say use your time between when you receive your admit and when you're going to start to find opportunities to have that experience. A lot of folks did unpaid internships, even if you have to, right, with smaller tech companies to build that muscle and get that experience. I think a lot of other folks did those internships not because they wanted to switch, but they just wanted to like try it out before you show up to the school and start your MBA program. There's a solid way to have a lot of context on what you want to do and also build expertise that helps you get into the new direction that you want to go for. So highly recommend doing that. I think, again, not a lot of people do it, but those who have done it have had like great experiences. So that's one. The second thing I would say is that the schools offer a lot. Like something like Wharton offers so much to do. So coming in with like some sort of a plan, like, hey, these are the courses I want to take. These are the activities I want to do. Be open to new stuff. So don't get too married to those. But having some idea of like things that you definitely want to do goes a long way. Or you're just inundated with so many choices. Like, oh, I don't know what to do. So that's another advice I would give. The third one is find people. At Wharton, before I joined, we had kind of like get-togethers and socials in Mumbai and Delhi. And I met so many folks before I showed up to Wharton. That's how I found my roommate and who I lived with for 2 years. And that's a great way to just know the right folks, get a lot of advice from what they are doing. That's another highly recommended thing. Yeah.
Okay, those are some wonderful tips. Thanks for sharing that. And with that, we also will bring our show to its conclusion. Thank you so much for such wonderful advice that you've shared. I think this will be very, very beneficial for our listeners.
I hope so. And thanks so much for inviting me. This was a really fun experience to kind of relive my 2 years at Wharton.
Yeah, the pleasure was mutual. Thanks once again.